thanks Iñigo for agreeing to come on and just do this, some online learning for the Arsenal Sems. Thanks for everyone else for registering and coming in. We won't be super long. We're just going to, Iñigo's agreed to answer a few questions from me, so we'll have a bit of a kind of Q&A amongst ourselves, and then we'll put it out to those who are listening. So at the bottom there should be a chat option. Probably you've all been on a lot of online learning, so you're probably better at this than me. But if you just put in the chat, then we're going to try and screen as we go along some of the questions, and at the end we'll try and pick out some for Iñigo to answer there as well. So that's enough from me. I'll just introduce Iñigo Mujika from the Basque Country, and I'm sure most of you will have already heard of him and seen a lot of his work. He's a sports physiologist and a coach with a very big experience in a lot of sports, including swimming and running, triathlon, rowing, but also team sports. So he was also involved in football, Athletic Club Bilbao, for a good while, and water polo. But I'll let Iñigo introduce himself in a bit more detail. Then I'll kick off with the first question.
Oh,
thanks, Iñigo.
Hello, Alan. Good morning, everyone. Well, as Alan just said, I'm a physiologist, and I've been also a coach on the side. I'm a level 3 triathlon and swimming coach, accredited, but I've been doing a lot of triathlon coaching for about 14 years, particularly with 2 Basque athletes. One of them went to 4 Olympic Games. The other one has won a few Ironman races. But I have also worked in team sports. I was the head of research and development at Athletic Bilbao for a few years ago, before any club had any research and development departments or sports science departments. And I've also been the physiologist for the Australian water polo teams. And at the moment, I'm the sports science coordinator for the Spanish aquatics. And that means that I have responsibilities over pool swimming, open water swimming, diving, synchronized swimming, and also water polo. That's my main occupation nowadays, but I mostly work as a freelance. So I'm also associate professor at the University of the Basque Country and associate researcher at the University Finisterra in Santiago de Chile. So those are my main occupations nowadays.
Perfect, thanks. So the topic today is around this kind of restricted training period that we're in, sort of detraining, retraining. And I was actually looking for a paper that you wrote. There was 2 parts to it on detraining, and it took me ages to find. And the reason I couldn't find it is because it was in 2000. I didn't actually realise that that one in sports medicine had been written in 2000. So I guess there's quite a lot of questions. You've done stuff since then as well. And the main thing, there's a lot of people that I talk to within the club, our club as well, many other teams, federations, and a lot of people are worried about this period that we're in where players and athletes aren't allowed to train. And then there's the other side where other people aren't too concerned and also seeing it as a bit of an opportunity or an off-season period. But I was wondering if you could sort of describe to us what can we expect from our athletes in this period of downtime restricted training?
Well, Alan, as you said, those papers on detraining were written in 2000 and around 2000, because I wrote like 4 or 5 papers on the topic. But those papers were mostly on the physiological aspect of training cessation. And human physiology hasn't changed. And what I mean by that is that even though they are already 20 years old, I think what we knew back then is basically what we know today about detraining. And we know that if you completely stop training within 4 weeks, there are going to be a lot of changes, a lot of negative changes in terms of the cardiorespiratory system of the athletes, the metabolic system of the athletes, and also the muscular aspects. So there is going to be muscular detraining as well. Nowadays, we are in a completely different situation because we are not in a period of training cessation, hopefully, unless someone is hiding at home and not doing any of the work that we are prescribing them to do. we are in a situation of limited training or reduced training. And already in those papers that I wrote in 2000, we talked about how we could try to maintain training-induced adaptations during periods of limited training like we are in today, or restricted training. And basically we have two options there. We have the option of reduced training strategy, which is training much less than we normally do. And there are studies out there, more recent studies, even on highly trained athletes, showing that even if you do only one third of the training that you usually do, you can retain adaptations for a very long time, particularly if you are moderately trained. If you are an elite athlete, you are going to need a little bit more training, or you are going to retain the adaptations for less longer, for a shorter period of time. The key in that situation is to try to maintain intensity high. Training intensity is one of the key variables when we aim at retaining training-induced adaptations. We can afford to reduce training volume by a lot. We can reduce by 60–80%. We can reduce that volume through a reduction in training frequency. For example, there is a study on elite kayakers who train 3 times a week during 5 weeks of restricted or limited training or reduced training. They do 1 session a week of strength trainings, 3 sets of 10 reps at 80% of 1 RM, and they do 2 sessions a week of 40 minutes of cycling or paddling. This is kayakers again.
Yeah.
And those athletes limit the amount of detraining by as much as 50%. So basically they are able to retain the adaptations 50% better than a group that completely stopped training for those 5 weeks. The other option that we have is cross-training, which is participating in an activity that is different to the one we usually perform. So if we are swimmers, we go out running. If we are runners, we go out cycling. And if we are cyclists, we go kayaking. And that is an efficient strategy to retain adaptations for longer. But we need to know that cross-training is only effective for highly trained athletes if it is what we call similar mode cross-training. And similar mode means that it has to be similar. The new activity should be similar in terms of biomechanics, or in terms of the type of movements that you do, the muscle groups that you involve in the movement, and also in terms of the physiological demands. So in other words, if a marathon runner goes rock climbing, it might be very good for his head to forget about the running shoes and forget about the asphalt, but it's not a good strategy to retain training-induced adaptation. On the other hand, if that marathon runner goes cross-country skiing, well, that is going to be an effective strategy because biomechanically it's similar. The muscle groups that participate in the movement are very similar, and it's also similar in terms of the physiological demands. It's still a long duration, moderate intensity activity. So those are the requirements for cross-training to be effective for highly trained athletes. For moderately trained people, any type of activity is going to be better than not doing anything, and it's going to help to retain adaptations.
In terms of that's also in a kind of ideal setting where we've got access to everything we wanted to ideally do that. But we were just chatting about before we came on, where I am, we're still allowed to go out and run or exercise, or if I had a bike, then I could go out on the bike. Whereas for you, it's different because you're more restricted and not allowed out. So is there, what would your advice be there to try and maximize opportunities?
Well, of course, as always, we need to assess the possibilities that we have. I live in an apartment and I can't go out. Well, in my case, I have a turbo trainer and I have some dumbbells and I have a Swiss ball at home and an elastic band. Well, with that, I can do a lot. A lot of football players, they live in houses with big gardens, and basically they can do almost everything in that situation. A lot of them have little gyms organized at home, so they can basically keep training in the same way that they would train in a period of non-specific football training. So the first thing we need to do is analyze the possibilities. But even if you have very reduced space and you don't have any equipment, the internet has been flooded these days with options, examples of sessions that you can do using your own body weight, using I don't know, water jars instead of dumbbells. There are a lot of options, core strength training. So there is no excuse not to do anything. So there is always some things that can be done. We have swimmers who don't have the possibility of going out. They live in an apartment. They don't have a turbo trainer. They don't have a rowing machine or anything like that at home. And they are still doing 3 to 4 hours of training every single day. So all you need to do is be creative, use your imagination, go to the internet, look for new ideas, maintain the interest in training. Don't ask athletes to do the same thing every single day, because after 3 days they're gonna get so bored that they will stop doing it. So keep writing training programs, keep renovating those training programs. You need to consider that we are in a phase of maintenance. We are not in a phase of development. So you don't have to do anything to try to improve. All we are trying to do is maintain as much as possible. Even if deep down we know that we are going to lose some adaptations, particularly the more specific adaptations required for our own individual sports.
Yeah. In terms of, it's a difficult one because there is so much variation, but what would your sort of recommendations be when teams or athletes are allowed to start coming back to the training centres? Would there be anything that you, like how long would you expect certain adaptations to take to come back? Would there be any recommendations you would sort of give, not only for athletes, but for the federations or governing bodies as well, just for that kind of safe return? Because everyone's obviously keen to get back into it. And maybe as soon as we're allowed out, everyone will want to start playing.
Well, I think it's going to be very important to do a follow-up of what's going on for each particular athlete during these days of lockdown. So we cannot assume that everyone is doing the same amount of work or that they are doing the work that we are prescribing. So we really need to follow up what they are actually doing. It would be interesting to make some kind of assessment as soon as they get back to see where everyone is. Some might have lost a lot because unfortunately we also know that the rate of loss of adaptations is not the same for everyone. There are individual adaptation and disadaptation profiles. So it would be a good idea to make some kind of assessment as soon as the players get back to the club. And based on that assessment, we will have to do some kind of pre-season-like type of work to bring everyone back up to a similar level before we can actually start playing. Because one of the things that they are not going to be able to do, no matter what they have, even if they have big gardens, etc., is the really high intensity, high specificity work. That is accelerations, decelerations, jumps, landing, that type of one against one type of work. That's not going to be possible even if they keep really fit and they do a lot of cardiovascular work and they do strength training and they do core training, that very specific type of requirement that is involved in team sports is not going to be there. So that's the risky one in terms of getting injured.
Yeah.
So some leagues are talking about getting back and playing every 48 hours. And I think that's going to be, if they do that, it's absolutely crazy because players are going to get injured nonstop. So we are going to need some pre-season-like type of training. I'm not saying for the entire duration of a pre-season, which is usually 6, 7, 8 weeks, but we're going to need at least a couple of weeks of that type of very specific work before we can even think about playing football competitively.
Yeah. And in terms of just like you're talking about the sport specificity, some other conversations I've been having with different people was on sort of cognitive training or maintaining a kind of cognitive ability or decision-making ability. I don't know if you've ever done any work on that or.
Well, there is studies showing that even thinking about your sport is going to help you retain some of those adaptations. In this case, I'm not talking about the ability to make decisions and to take tactical decisions during play, but there is a study in which they mobilize the forearm in 2 groups, and one group is sent home for 4 weeks. The other one is also sent home, but they are required to do 4 sets of 13 imaginary contractions of the forearm muscles, with 5 seconds recovery in between imaginary contractions and a minute recovery between sets. And at the end of the 4 weeks, they take out the cast of the forearm, and one of the groups has lost 45% of the forearm strength. And the group that has been thinking about doing the contractions, but they don't contract the muscles because they actually use EMG to make sure that they do not contract the muscles, has only lost 24%. So they reduced the loss by about 50%. And even maximal voluntary contraction in one group is dropping by 25%, in the other group is only dropping by 13%. So just thinking about performing your exercise and doing your sport-specific type of activity is going to help in terms of maintaining adaptation. And if it's working for such a physical aspect as strength, it's going to work for more cognitive aspects of sports play. That's my point of view.
Yeah.
So think about the sport, watch sports, watch videos, even play video games of the specific sport is going to contribute to retain that cognitive adaptation.
So yeah, so I get like, your main takeaways then, because I won't ask too much more now and see if other people start putting in some questions. So if those listening want to ask something, if you start putting in now, that'd be great. So yeah, I guess your top takeaways from that on what to do. So maintain high intensity, high specificity as much as possible, and think about your sport. Anything else that I've missed from those kind of key takeaways?
Do as much as you can, but always keeping in mind that you are not trying to develop anything. Although you can develop some things that you might have been missing due to your regular training and your involvement in your specific sport. So sometimes we are so involved into trying to be good at what we do that we forget to work on other aspects that are also important. So this might be the time to work on those limitations that we might have and those things that we are missing in our physical development, in our strength abilities, in our core strength, in our flexibility, for example. So remember that we are basically trying to maintain. We can improve some aspects that might not be optimized during our usual training. Always keep in mind that you are never going to reach the specificity that you reach when you are doing your sport. And also keep in mind that you have any symptoms of illness, you are supposed to follow the usual rules. If symptoms are above your throat, you can do easy, moderate training. If it's below the throat, it's better to stop training and get healthy before you go on.
Perfect.
And of
Thank
course,
you,
find medical advice.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Thanks, Iñigo. There's a few questions coming in. I'll just go through here. There's one on, is there any advice for a minimum safe build-up from isolation training to a full game? So assuming football, rugby. I know that's not easy to answer, but is there any sort of key recommendations?
As I said before, there is that paper on elite kayakers showing that instead of doing 10, 11 sessions per week, they go down to doing 1 session of strength per week and 2 sessions of aerobic type of work for 40 minutes. And I won't say that they maintain all of the adaptations, but they limit the loss to 50%. So at the end of the 5 weeks of reduced training, they have only lost about 5% of the strength and about 10% of the cardiorespiratory qualities that they had before. So by doing 1/3 of what you usually do, you can retain a lot of your adaptations, and that has been shown also on moderately trained athletes. Those studies were done by Hickson in the 80s. So they trained people for 10 weeks and then they reduced training for 15 weeks. And it is a series of 3 studies in which one of the times they reduced training intensity. In another study, they reduced training volume, and in another study, they reduced training frequency by either 33 or 66%. So if you are doing 6 sessions per week, they reduced to either 4 or 2. If they were training 60 minutes, they reduced to either 40 or 20. And they also reduced training intensity by either 33% or 66%. And what they saw was that training intensity was key. So when they reduced training intensity only by 33%, there was a clear loss in short-term endurance and also in long-term endurance. However, when they reduced training volume and training frequency, even by 66%, they were able to maintain most of the adaptations for an additional 15 weeks. So volume and frequency are not as important as intensity. Yeah. And that means that you can afford to train much less as long as the training that you do is relatively high in intensity. Again, keeping in mind that you are not trying to develop anything, you are only trying to maintain. So you don't have to go crazy maintaining the intensities that you were doing if you were preparing for a specific competition.
Perfect, thank you. There's a question here, Shane Lowe, just asking if you can mention anything about technologies that you've used for performance, injury risk or recovery tracking, and how they can help in this period or once the people, the athletes and players come back.
Well, if the athletes can log on to software platforms like Training Peaks or something similar, and they can download the type of training that they are doing, the amount of training that they are doing, the power outputs or the strength work that they are doing, that will help strength and conditioning coaches, fitness coaches, keep track of the amount of work that the athletes are doing. And even without testing, they, based on the knowledge that we have on detraining and training retention and reduced training, they can get a good idea of how much those athletes might have lost during that time. So the more information you can get about the type of work and the amount of work that the athletes are doing, the more clear idea you're going to have of where they are at when they get back. So any platform, any technology that you are using for tracking training and also for tracking recovery and subjective feelings of training status of the athletes is going to be good to keep you informed and start your training program on a more solid basis.
Yeah, perfect. And there's just a couple more to go. There's one here. Where did it go? So variety was mentioned. Like you spoke about variety. This population is very regimented and institutionalized. Do you suggest variation of times of training or to the kind of training week that the athlete normally has for specific exercise resistance work or CUV? So it's, yeah, do we try and keep the timetables that they're used to or take them away from it?
It depends. If there is a lot of variety and it makes it fun, you can stick to that. If your training is very repetitive and you tend to do the same thing over and over again, this might be a good period to make it fun, to do a lot of cross training, to do a lot of things that you don't normally do, because being stuck at home is already hard enough. So if you make it harder by not adding variety to the training, chances are that the athletes are going to disengage from the training program. So I think it's a good time to do cross training. It's a good time to do things that you don't normally do, particularly because, I repeat again, you're not trying to develop, you're trying to maintain. And even though we know the limitations of cross training, particularly for the highly trained athletes, because we are in a phase of maintenance, anything that we do to make it fun, to make it interesting, to make it entertaining is going to be positive. What you lose in terms of specific adaptations, you might gain in terms of engagement and participation.
And this one's one that actually, as we've been speaking to quite a lot of people about as well, is there any suggestions for those who might be in a rehabilitative or return to activity phase? So yeah, I guess the injured players, how any recommendations on how you're dealing with them?
Well, this might be the perfect timing to get everyone healthy, to get everyone ready to play or ready to start training when they get back. So I think it's easier for the injured athlete who doesn't need specific technologies for recovery and rehabilitation. It might be a good timing because those are exercises that you can do in a smaller space. So you can probably do that even if you live in a small apartment. So the type of training that you do in the rehab gym is probably the same type of training that you can do when you are stuck at home. And it might be a good period to kind of equalize, the athletes who were behind because of an injury or because of a lack of fitness, and those athletes who were in perfect condition, because some of them can keep gaining, whereas some of them are going to lose a little bit. So this period of lockdown is probably going to be a little bit of an equalizer when we get back.
I think we've just got one or two last ones, if that's okay, Iñigo.
Yeah, that's
this
fine.
one, I'll read this one out. So when teams return to gym sessions, do you think that training plans should continue in line with where it should be at that time? I.e., if the team returns to the gym at the beginning of May, which was due to be a peaking phase, should they begin this training phase, or should you go back to where they were prior to the break and push back the peaking phase?
I think the training programs have to be modified. We are no longer where we were, and when we get back, we are no longer going to be where we left it. So we need to reassess, probably get back to basics, and we will need to start again, knowing that there is this this retention of adaptations, and that we are not going to start from zero. And the players, if they have been doing the work, they are going to get back to peak fitness much faster than they do in the preseason when they have been on vacation for several weeks. So my answer, the brief answer is no, you don't continue, or I don't think you should continue where you were, because we need to reassess everything. We don't have specific goals because we don't know when we are going to get back into competition. And in order to maintain your training program, you need to have a competition calendar that we don't have at this moment. And I think it would be a waste of time and a waste of a peak if we stick to the program that we have planned when we knew what the calendar was going to be.
Perfect. And I'll just go on the last one, because that's us at time. It's maybe a nice one to finish on. And it's really just a confirmation, I guess. So maintenance of adaptation is psychological, biomechanical, physiological, i.e. continue to maintain mind and body, ? So that's the overall.
Yep, absolutely. Maintaining the motivation is going to be hard, because we all love to go out. And I was sending my friends a joke this morning. I sent a surf forecast indicating that there are no waves in our usual surfing spot, and I said, well, there is no waves, I think I might as well stay home, as a joke, because we all need to stay home, and it's not very motivating to stay home. We all want to go out there and do our thing. So maintaining motivation is going to be very difficult. On the other hand, maintaining a decent level of fitness is going to be not that hard from my point of view, as long as the athletes are convinced of the value of doing the work even in these conditions.
Perfect. Thanks, Iñigo. I don't want to go too much over time, because I really appreciate taking the time. Yeah, thanks very much. What have you got on for your training today?
Today, nothing yet, but what time is it? Well, around noon, I do a couple of sets of strength training with the dumbbells and the Swiss ball, and then in the evening, around 7 p.m., I do between 60 and 120 minutes on the turbo trainer. So morning, a little bit of strength, afternoon, a little bit of endurance.
Brilliant.
And core work. After the bike, I do some core work.
Brilliant. I really appreciate your time, and thanks everyone as well for registering and putting in some questions. Sorry if I've missed a few there, but thanks again.